Welcome, my darlings, to my humble chateau. Please make yourself very comfortable. Relax your mind and release your imagination to me. I will bring you a story to entrance and entertain. Perhaps a frightening one. Perhaps a steampunk. Perhaps a bit of mythology. Anyway, sit back, enjoy, and subscribe to me. Welcome, my darlings. Today I bring you a story out of an old pulp fiction magazine, one that was called Coven 13. And the title intrigued me because of my love for the poem The Highwayman. It's by Jean W. Cerrito, and it's entitled I'll Come to You by Moonlight. The wind was a torrent of darkness among the gusty trees. The moon was a ghostly galleon tossed upon the cloudy seas. The intro: this is truly a candle to light you to sleep, a most classic example of the horror drama from the macabre but ever competent pen of Jean W. Cerrito. Over the covered bridge and up the rise of Tandy's Hill, then down the gentle slopes of Brant's and Ellison's well-groomed acres, white with the snow of Christmas, the wheels of the heavy blue Cadillac made a wet humming sound as it hurled on past these last two stately farms. In the near distance was the Massachusetts village of Ancroft, which, to the driver of the Cadillac, seemed framed in the wintry scene of bright sun, sparkling snow, and barren iron-laced arms of thickets of ash and oak and maple. All well remembered. The eyes of Richard Stoddard, the driver, gleamed, glistened, actually with the quick wash of tears. It was indeed remembered. An absence of 10 years had not dimmed his memory. No, if anything, he thought as he neared the village's first houses and shops. If anything, it was better than ever. It remained now to be seen if Marion's memory was as good as his, though he smiled grimly at the thought. Even if her memory did fail her, there was always the other. Richard Stoddard, first among the prestidigitators, America's heir to Blackstone, at the age of 28, the Western world's greatest magician. Stoddard, master hypnotist, master telepath, admitting to no peer in the field of Dunagar. So had he been billed in theaters and auditoriums across the country. And since those first bleak months 10 years ago, when he had left Ancroft penniless, and with his young world shattered, it seemed beyond repair. Now he returned in victory. The old home, lost with the suddenness of his father's financial failure and subsequent suicide, had been repurchased. All was in order awaiting his occupancy. Lights and gas were on. The coal had been delivered. The last of the Stoddards was again to assume his place in a community already old in the days of the American Revolution. Yes, he mused, the Stoddard house, colonial, beautiful, so much an integral part of himself, just as the home of the Hamiltons, the Griffins, the Fernsworth were anchors for a way of life to be nurtured, protected, and perpetuated. And now, too, Marian Farnsworth would be his again, as she had been before, as she was destined to be, so that he had sworn after all had been lost, that he would return, though all hell barred the way. The town, he noted as he drove, had changed in subtle ways, the change reflecting in a singular form of American progress. A new standard station had taken the place of Wolford's solitary pump. A supermarket now catered to Ancroft and the surrounding countryside, and a new drugstore, with everything from pharmacopoeia to plastic luggage, sat glittering, ablaze with lights and the color of tinsel. And Christmas, as indeed did all the town. Richard Stoddard pulled to a halt in a slot before the drugstore. He needed cigarettes and sundries. He pushed his way to a counter through the jostling, exuberant, last-minute Christmas Eve crowd. "Richard!" a feminine voice cried out at his elbow. "John, it's Richard!" He turned to look down to a well-remembered face, and then across to an equally smiling visage. "John," he said softly, "Emily. Somehow I knew you two would be the first ones I would meet." Emily, small, blue-eyed, fur-coated, and very blonde, stood on tiptoes to kiss his cheek, while John Reese, tall, and as dark as his supposedly buccaneer ancestors, pumped his hand vigorously. "We never," Emily gasped. "We just never." "We never knew you'd be in town," John finished quietly. "We've talked a lot about you, Rick. All the things you've done. We watched that special CBS program on the world of hypnotism. You were great, Rick." "Thanks," he said. "And all of it," Emily smiled slyly, "from those games we used to play." Then, "Oh, Rick, it's good to see you again. Will you be here long? Where are you staying?" There were tears in her eyes, and she hugged him again, impulsively. He felt quick warmth and pride, too, in that here indeed was solid proof that he had achieved what he set out to do. "I'm staying home," he said, quietly, deliberately. "I bought the old place back." "Oh, Richard," Emily said, "I am so glad for you." "I'm on my way there now," he informed them. I've promised myself this. It's like 10 years ago tonight that I left, you know. You should remember. It was the night of the senior prom." A shadow flashed briefly in Emily's eyes. She said softly, "Oh, Rick, we've wondered and thought about you so many times. Don't think about that night now." "As a matter of fact," John put in quickly, "why don't you come with us? Home is home, I know, but it's Christmas Eve, Rick. Em and I are married now. That should be obvious. And we've got a thing for tonight, just a few people. Old ones and new ones. Ed Larson will be there. Jim Ains, too. With Martha. They're married, like Em and me." "No," he said strongly. "I'll take a rain check. Tomorrow, maybe, in the afternoon, I'll call you. We'll have a drink at your place or mine. Believe me, I appreciate it." He enfolded Emily in a quick bear hug and put a hand on John's shoulder. Emily sniffed and John smiled, and he said softly, "After all, home is just across the arm from Marion's. If I get lonely, I'll holler over." Emily's face darkened imperceptibly, and she said, "Rick!" But John silenced her, interrupting, saying, "Never mind about nonsense, baby. This is Rick's night. Our unprodigal son is home. Call us," he finished. "Call us anyhow if you get lonely." And then they were gone, lost in the crowd and the seasonal smells of Christmas. He purchased cigarettes and half a dozen magazines and left too. out in the dusk of late afternoon, and the chill, low ceiling of fat, snow-filled clouds. The temperature on the huge thermometer above the drugstore entrance read 15 degrees, and he shivered and was glad for the Cadillac's warmth. Richard Stoddard placed one last log on the freshly laid fire, then stepped away from its meager circle of warmth to an almost deadly cold of the space before the huge and leaded Cape Cod window. It had been much too late to fire up the furnace, and even if he had, the house, this room, would have taken some time to heat. The cold was penetrating, alive. It lent emphasis in a way to a timeless quality of the house which, to the casual observer, would be seen as a massive pile of stone and wood against a barren, rock-strewn hillside. The scene was familiar. The years had changed nothing. Below, to the far right, was a shadowy line of the county road that circled the hill to lose itself in the houses that would eventually merge to form the village of Ancroft. The road skirted the narrow inlet known in the local parlance as the Arm, and though it was part of the sea since it was shallow, it was frozen now along the greater part of its length. Prior to freezing, it offered scant protection from the open sea beyond, a peculiar configuration of shore and bluff-funneled winds into the aperture, creating a chop which was both dangerous and irritating to the few small boats of the local property owners. The Arm was white now, too, with drifted snow and flat like a leveled field. Across the stretch of ice was the other house, ablaze with lights of the season and warmth and people. Would his own lights be visible? Stupid question. But would they even bother to look across the Arm? Maybe she had been told. Perhaps Emily had called her. If so, would she come? All logic told him that was the only way she would come. To think of the other way was madness, for only a madman would hope that, and only a madman would think it possible. Stoddard flicked the lights of the living room on and off, signaling, then gazed at them in disgust, and walked down the long hall to the kitchen. He turned hall and kitchen lights on as he walked. There was beer in the refrigerator, wine too, which should not have been there. He chose the wine in a glass and retraced his path, turning the lights off again as he went, including those in the living room. Either she would come one way, or she would come the other. Marion. If he thought of her now as she had been, 17, dark blue eyes, black hair, and a white, almost translucent skin, denoting her Celtic ancestry. And she had been destined for him, for the Fernsworth females always married the Stoddard males, and that was that. He remembered the scene when he told her his father was dead, and that his family, himself and his mother, were penniless, and there would be no Yale, no Harvard, and perhaps no marriage. She had been tearful, hysterical. She had vowed not to let him go, and because it was winter and cold then, too. They had sat in that very boathouse which he could see across the way now, as a gray shadow against the iron black of the hillside and the white of the snow, and held each other close for what seemed an interminable hours, until darkness fell, and there was the need to return to respective homes and parents. And the next day, his mother died. The day after that, he was informed by the family lawyer that there was no money, that even the house must be sold for debts. That very night, sickened by total shock and fear, he had managed to go to the senior prom, for he had vowed that though on the morrow he would leave Ancroft, he would also return. No Stoddard had ever given up on the face of adversity. He would not be the first to do so. He had spent the day packing. When the night came, he dressed and threw his valise into the back of the '58 Chevy. Then he had stopped for Marion. On the way to Crofts Hall, the site of the prom, he had told her what he would do, and they discussed it. Again she had been tearful, remonstrative, but she had finally agreed, so that when they entered to light, music, and festivities, their face belied the tragedy that their world was shattered, perhaps beyond salvage. They danced and mingled with the others, put up the bold front required of the situation. Then their particular in-group had moved to Marion's for a final session to end the evening. That's where the game had been played, the one at which he was already so adept. Rick, they had gathered around him. Rick, just once, with Adelaide and Edward. Ralph Hawkins, husky, flushed, blonde, and excited, had been the perpetrator. He had pushed a visiting male cousin together with the cousin's mousy girlfriend to the fore. They'd never seen it done, Hawkins said. They don't even believe it can be. Show 'em. He had begged off, but they persisted. It's no good that way, he had said. I've got to have cooperation. You'll get it, Edward, the cousin promised. He was a young man, thin to the point of emaciation. The girlfriend, Adelaide, was equally thin, also waspish, irritable, but curious. So he had, with a simple metal pendulum and light, put the both of them in deep hypnosis. They had played the game to the hilarity of the onlookers. They were various animals. They were their own parents. Adelaide was made stiff and placed between two chairs, her neck on the top of one, her ankles on the other, so that Edward sat upon her thin middle, with no untoward result. He even gave them a post-hypnotic suggestion, a simple thing, like each heading for the John at the same time after they were no longer under hypnosis. That was what had given him the idea, and because of it, he had deliberately prolonged the session, insisting that Marion be hypnotized too. Had she always been an excellent subject? The idea had swept like a maelstrom across his mind. Insane, grotesque, but she was his, and he would keep her. No matter who she went with after he was gone, or who she married. If she was forced to that, he would fix it so that she would come again to him. He had continued the game. Marion, shapely and softly curved, was not athletic. Still he had her, for amusement of the others, walk across the room on her hands, do a difficult series of one-arm push-ups to cheers and applause. Then he had obstinately snapped her out of it, but not quite. And while glasses were being refilled all around, he sat her next to him and said softly, but directly and firmly, "Hear me, Marion, and never forget. 10 years from this day, on Christmas Eve, and at exactly 6 o'clock, you will come to me from wherever you are. You will come to me, to my home." He had repeated it, adding, "And nothing will prevent you from doing this. You will come to me, to my house, and I will be waiting. I will be waiting and watching, and you will come to me, crossing the ice of the arm, and we will not part again, Marion. Nothing will part us ever again." His voice had been soft, monotone. He and Marion had sat so quietly that the others had ceased to notice them. Only Emily Fairchild. She had been a Fairchild then, had sat and watched and listened, and he remembered now that there had been a look of almost puzzled horror on her face, until he had laughed and shrugged and brought Marion really back, so that she joined his laughter, and Emily's fears were assuaged. The last faint peeling of sun against clouds was suddenly gone. The gray darkness of a swift falling twilight began rapidly to blur the outline of the house and the hill beyond. The arm. Even a swirl of snow danced for seconds to add to the obscurity. Then the flakes were gone, and a break in the clouds allowed the full moon to make all silvery the expanse of snow and ice below. It was then that he saw her, appearing as if from nowhere. He gripped the leather arms of the chair, half arose, hardly breathing. God, he hadn't really believed it would happen. He just hadn't. But there she was. Marion was there. But maybe it wasn't so crazy. Perhaps she had seen the smoke from the chimney, the brief flicker of lights. Maybe Emily had called her. Maybe 100 things. What difference did it make? Marion was coming. She was coming to him. That was the important thing, the only thing. He stood now by the window, his hands clenched at his side, tears in his eyes. Below him, halfway across the 100-yard ice sheet of the arm, Marion kept coming. Her feet left dark tracks in the powdered snow above the ice. Should he go down to the hill to meet her? But no, maybe she wanted it this way. Perhaps she remembered too, though he thought quickly of the post-hypnotic suggestion. That would be impossible. He had never told her, even in their brief exchange of letters before the pain had grown too much, and he had ceased writing, but maybe Emily had told her. The phone rang, and he impatiently returned to the chair and the fire and the low table, placed not too far from the window, that he couldn't see the arm below. Marion moved steadily ahead, but strange now, she seemed dressed only in slacks and a blouse. In this weather? He was tempted again to go to her, but the jangling phone was insistent. He settled back into the deep leather comfort, saying irritably blunt, "Stoddard here." "Rick?" It was Emily. "Oh, good, Rick. I'm so glad we caught you," he said. "You knew I'd be here." "I know. I'm sorry. But, oh, Rick, won't you reconsider and have dinner with us? It's Christmas Eve, Rick. You can't stay alone up there. And we want you with us." For seconds, the hypnotic effect of the fire, which had been so carefully laid, and which now gave the room its only light, together with Emily's voice, intruded on the other, and he was tempted. But no, to hell with it. He wanted to be alone with Marion, and he guessed that she would want that too. He looked out to the moon and the snow. Marion had disappeared below the base of the hill. She'd be climbing now. He said, "No, Emily, I thank you again. John, too. And I won't be alone," he confided. "Marion is coming, like old times, like it was always meant to be. So maybe tomorrow. Drinks or something? We'll call you." "Marion?" Emily's voice was strangely flat. "Yes," he said. "We had a pact, remember? You were there, Em." "Oh!" Emily said again. He suddenly felt anger and said, "Look, is it so strange? Others have waited longer. Marion and I—" "It's not that, Rick." Emily's voice was a whisper. "Then what?" he asked angrily. He heard the back door open and close, and a log snap to the fireplace, sending a blaze of spark high into the chimney. "Marion's dead, Rick." "Dead?" 2 years ago. We thought you knew. She died in the Kennebec storm. Ron Blake's yawl tried to make to the safety of the arm and was caught in that chop instead. He and Marion were both drowned, Rick. Their bodies were never found." Her voice seemed to drift away. She still talked, but he no longer heard her. The words were lost in the sound of footsteps in the hall and the roaring in his ears. He returned the phone to its cradle, noticed that the fire had suddenly died, so that a cloying cold moved through the room. The moon peered through the window now, bathing him in a wash of silver light. He heard the door from the hall and the kitchen open and close, yet he made no move to rise. He waited instead for what seemed interminable seconds, waiting until a shrunken white and Venus hand was placed gently upon his shoulder, moved to his cheek. Then he arose to look. There were tears in his eyes, but there was no fear in his voice when he spoke, only horror, plus an odd compassion and a terrible hurt. He gazed wide-eyed at the ice-encrusted form, at the abomination of slacks and blouse that had outlived the flesh beneath. He stared into the soap-like flesh of cheek and forehead, and into the filmed and opaque eyes, and he said simply, "Oh, Christ! Oh, Mother of God! What have I done?" So quoth this raven. That was a fun little story, my darlings. Very much of the pulp fiction era. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like so I know what you want to hear. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. And ring the little bell so you know when you can come up and see me. And if you reply, I will do my best to reply back. Bye-bye, my darlings.